A single pair of torn shoes changed everything. 17-year-old Marcus Williams stood barefoot in the rain, asking a stranger for help. The millionaire looked down at the homeless boy with an expression no one expected. What happened in the next 60 seconds would challenge everything witnesses believed about wealth, poverty, and human dignity. Act 1, Setup Scene 1, Protagonist Introduction. Marcus Williams was 17 years old, but his eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived twice that long. Every morning, he woke before dawn on a worn bench in Riverside Park, folding the donated blanket that had become his only possession besides the clothes on his back. His shoes, once white sneakers, now consisted mostly of duct tape and hope, the soles so thin he felt every pebble beneath his feet. He had been on the streets for 8 months, ever since his grandmother passed away. She had raised him in a small apartment after his parents died in a car accident when he was 6. When she died, the landlord had wasted no time evicting him. No other family existed. No safety net caught his fall. But Marcus refused to let the streets harden his heart. Each morning, after folding his blanket and hiding it behind the park bench, he walked 3 miles to Riverside Community Center, where volunteers served breakfast. He always waited until others had eaten first, taking only what remained. Then he spent his days looking for odd jobs, carrying groceries for elderly shoppers, washing car windows at traffic lights, sweeping sidewalks for store owners who took pity on him. Just get through today, he told himself every morning. Tomorrow might be better. He was tall and lean, his brown skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His hair, despite his circumstances, was neatly trimmed. He'd learned to cut it himself using a small mirror and scissors borrowed from the community center. Dignity, his grandmother had taught him, wasn't about what you owned. It was about how you carried yourself. Marcus still attended the library 3 times a week, reading whatever books he could find. He'd been a straight-A student before homelessness claimed him. Now, education felt like a dream from another life, but he couldn't let go of it entirely. Knowledge was the one thing no one could take from him. On this particular November morning, the first snow of the season had fallen overnight. Marcus's feet were numb inside his disintegrating shoes. He'd wrapped them in plastic bags, but water had seeped through anyway. As he walked toward the community center, each step sent sharp cold shooting up his legs. Scene 2, Antagonist Introduction. Richard Blackwell III sat in the back of his Mercedes, scrolling through his phone with barely contained irritation. Traffic had stalled on Riverside Avenue, and his driver apologized for the 3rd time. Richard didn't acknowledge him. At 32, Richard had inherited his father's commercial real estate empire and doubled it within 5 years. He wore success like armor, $1,000 suits, Italian leather shoes, a watch worth more than most people's annual salary. His penthouse overlooked the city's wealthiest district. He dined at restaurants where reservations required months of waiting. His social circle consisted entirely of people who could afford the same lifestyle. To Richard, there were 2 types of people, those who mattered and those who were invisible. He'd learned early that sympathy was weakness. His father had taught him that the poor stayed poor because they lacked ambition, discipline, intelligence. Richard believed this absolutely. He'd never missed a meal, never worried about rent, never worn the same suit twice in a month. His success, he told himself, came from hard work and superior decision-making. Those sleeping on park benches had simply made bad choices. This morning, he was heading to a breakfast meeting at the Riverside Club, the city's most exclusive venue. He'd just closed a deal that would demolish an old apartment building downtown, one that housed primarily low-income families, and replace it with luxury condos. The profit would be substantial. The displaced tenants weren't his problem. Richard's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant confirming his afternoon meetings. He responded curtly, then noticed they'd finally started moving. The driver turned onto Riverside Avenue, where expensive boutiques lined the street. Richard glanced out the window, his expression reflecting the cold calculation that had made him wealthy. He saw homeless people as failures. Walking past them on the rare occasions he traveled by foot, he felt nothing except mild disgust. They were reminders of what happened when people didn't apply themselves, didn't plan properly, didn't understand how the world really worked. Yet beneath his carefully constructed confidence lay a hollow space he never acknowledged. His father had praised him only for financial achievements. His mother had cared more about social standing than emotional connection. Richard had learned to equate worth with wealth, value with victory. Love, kindness, empathy, these were luxuries for people who could afford to be soft. He could not. Scene 3, the inciting incident. Marcus had decided to try something different that morning. His shoes had finally given up completely, the sole of his right shoe had detached entirely, flapping with each step. He couldn't walk 3 miles like this. The cold would cause frostbite. He stood on the corner of Riverside Avenue, watching well-dressed people enter and exit expensive shops. His stomach churned with anxiety and shame, but desperation overrode pride. He'd asked for help before, most people ignored him, some gave spare change, a few offered harsh words. But he'd never asked for something specific, something as necessary as shoes. Just ask, he told himself. The worst they can say is no. The street gleamed with fresh snow, already turning gray with city grime. Marcus's breath came out in visible puffs. His hands, red and chapped, trembled slightly, whether from cold or nerves, he couldn't tell. He watched a woman exit a boutique carrying multiple shopping bags, but she hurried to her car before he could approach. Then he saw the Mercedes pull up to the curb in front of the Riverside Club. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door. A man emerged wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus's grandmother had paid for a year's rent. His shoes, polished black leather that caught the morning light, looked brand new. Marcus noticed he wore cufflinks, a detail that seemed almost absurd in its luxury. This was exactly the kind of person Marcus usually avoided. Wealthy people rarely responded kindly to requests for help. But those shoes, they were perfect. And Marcus was desperate. He approached slowly, his broken shoe flapping against the sidewalk. Several pedestrians turned to look, their expressions ranging from sympathy to disgust. Marcus kept his eyes on the man in the expensive suit, who was checking his phone as he walked toward the club entrance. "Excuse me, sir?" Marcus's voice came out quieter than he'd intended. Richard stopped, looking up from his phone with visible irritation. His eyes traveled from Marcus's face down to his feet, taking in the torn clothes, the plastic bags visible through the broken shoes, the general state of someone living on the streets. His expression hardened. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you," Marcus continued, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. I need shoes. Mine are completely destroyed, and it's freezing. I'm not asking for money, just, if you have an old pair you don't need, or if you know where I could get some, get away from me." Richard's voice was cold, sharp as broken glass. Marcus stepped back instinctively. "I'm sorry, you're sorry?" Richard's laugh held no humor. "You're standing here, in front of a private club, harassing members, and you think an apology is sufficient?" A small crowd had begun to form. Morning shoppers slowed their pace, watching the confrontation unfold. Marcus felt heat rise to his face despite the cold. This was exactly what he'd feared. "I wasn't harassing anyone," Marcus said quietly. You asked me to give you shoes." Richard's voice grew louder, playing to the audience now. "Let me guess, next you'll want my watch." "My wallet? Why should I give you anything? You clearly don't work. You're young, healthy. You could get a job like everyone else, but instead you choose to beg on street corners." "I do work," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do odd jobs." "I'm trying. Richard stepped closer, his expensive cologne overwhelming. "This is what trying looks like? Sleeping in parks and begging from successful people? I worked hard for everything I have. I earned it. You want to know why I have good shoes and you don't? Because I made better choices. Because I didn't give up. Because I understood that success requires sacrifice and discipline." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to explain, about his grandmother, about losing everything, about trying desperately to survive each day. But the words wouldn't come. The crowd around them had grown larger. Some people filmed on their phones. A few whispered to each other, judging, deciding who was right and who was wrong in this impromptu street theater. People like you, Richard continued, his voice dripping with contempt, are exactly what's wrong with this city. Always looking for handouts instead of pulling yourselves up. You want my advice? Stop begging and start working. Nobody owes you anything, not shoes, not money, not sympathy. You're homeless because you made bad decisions. That's not my problem. He turned away, dismissing Marcus entirely, and walked toward the club entrance. Marcus stood frozen, humiliation burning through him like acid. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, could hear whispered comments. A few people looked sympathetic, but most seemed to agree with the well-dressed man's assessment. After all, he looked successful. He must be right. Bad decisions, Marcus thought, his grandmother's face flashing in his mind. Was loving her a bad decision? Was being 11 years old when my parents died a bad decision? But he said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, his broken shoe flapping against the cold pavement, leaving wet footprints in the snow. Scene 4, Secret Observer introduced Elena Rodriguez sat in the window seat of the Riverside Cafe, directly across from the Riverside Club. She'd watched the entire confrontation. At 53, Elena was the founder and CEO of Rodriguez Holdings, a multinational corporation worth over $2 billion. She'd arrived in America at age 7 with her parents, who'd fled poverty in their home country with nothing but hope and determination. They'd worked 3 jobs each, lived in a single room with 5 other families, saved every penny so Elena could attend community college. She'd built her empire from a small tech startup in her garage. Now she employed 15,000 people worldwide, and she'd made it her mission to ensure every employee earned a living wage, received healthcare, had access to education benefits. She'd never forgotten where she came from. This morning, she was supposed to meet her lawyer at the Riverside Club. But she'd arrived early and decided to have coffee first, preferring the modest cafe to the pretentious club. Through the window, she'd watched the homeless teenager approach the man in the expensive suit. She'd seen the hope in the boy's face. Seen it transform into shame as the man berated him. Watched him walk away with his head down, dignity stripped away by someone who'd probably never known a single day of real struggle. Elena's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She knew Richard Blackwell III by reputation, had refused to do business with him twice because his practices disgusted her. He was everything she despised about inherited wealth, arrogant, cruel, utterly lacking in empathy. But the boy. Something about him reminded Elena of her younger brother, who'd died at 19 from an illness they couldn't afford to treat. That same quiet dignity, that same desperate hope struggling against impossible odds. She stood, leaving cash on the table, and walked outside. The boy had already disappeared down the street, but she could still see his footprints in the snow, one clear, one broken and uneven. She pulled out her phone and called her assistant. "Maria, I need you to do something for me. There's a homeless teenager, probably 17 or 18, last seen heading south on Riverside Avenue. I need to know who he is, where he stays, anything you can find out. Be discreet. Use our community outreach contacts." "Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. May I ask what this is about?" "Someone who needs help," Elena said simply. "Someone who reminds me why we do this work." She ended the call and looked toward the Riverside Club, where Richard Blackwell had just emerged with several other wealthy businessmen, all laughing about something. None of them had given a second thought to the boy they'd publicly humiliated. But Marcus had no idea his life was about to change, Elena thought, already formulating a plan. He had no idea that sometimes angels come when you least expect them, and that kindness, once witnessed, cannot be ignored. ACT 2, Rising Action Scene 5, Aftermath and Daily Struggle. Marcus spent the rest of that day in hiding. He couldn't face returning to his usual spots, the grocery store where he sometimes helped carry bags, the car wash where the owner occasionally let him earn $20. The humiliation still burned too fresh. Instead, he sat in the public library until closing time, pretending to read but mostly replaying the morning's confrontation in his mind. "You're homeless because you made bad decisions." The words echoed mercilessly. Marcus knew they weren't true, knew his circumstances resulted from tragedy and systems that failed vulnerable children, but doubt crept in anyway. Maybe he wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe he was weak for not somehow magically escaping his situation. When the library closed at 8, he walked back to Riverside Park. The temperature had dropped further. His feet had gone from numb to painfully cold to numb again. He knew this was dangerous, that frostbite was a real possibility, but what choice did he have? At the park, he found his usual bench and retrieved his blanket. Another homeless man, an older veteran named Jack, sat nearby. "Rough day?" Jack asked, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. "Something like that." "Your shoes are done, kid." "I know." Jack was silent for a moment, then reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of worn work boots. "These are too small for me anyway." "Size 10? 9.5, Marcus said, his throat tight. "Jack, I can't, you can and you will. Otherwise you'll lose your feet to frostbite, and then you'll really be stuck." Jack tossed the boots over. They were old and scuffed, but whole. "Consider it a loan. When you get back on your feet, pun intended, you help the next person." Marcus pulled off his destroyed sneakers and slid his feet into the boots. They were slightly too large, but they were warm and intact. For the first time that day, he felt something other than shame. "Thank you," he whispered. Jack just nodded and turned away, giving Marcus privacy to compose himself. That night, Marcus lay on his bench under his blanket, staring at stars barely visible through city lights. His grandmother used to say that stars were proof that light could survive even in darkness. He'd always found that corny. Tonight, wearing borrowed boots from a man who had nothing, he understood what she meant. Scene 6, first anonymous gift. 3 days later, Marcus was sweeping the sidewalk outside Murphy's Corner store when he noticed a package on the ground near the door. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with his name written on it in neat handwriting. Marcus Williams. He looked around. The street was busy with morning shoppers, but no one paid him attention. He picked up the package carefully, half expecting it to be a mistake or a prank. Inside was a pair of thick winter gloves, a warm hat, and a note on heavy cardstock. "What happened to you was not your fault. What you do next is entirely your choice. You have more strength than you know. Someone believes in you." No signature. No return address. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled on the gloves. They fit perfectly. The hat was soft wool, the kind that actually kept out cold instead of just decorating your head. He read the note 3 more times, trying to understand. Who would do this? Who even knew his name? Mr. Murphy came outside with a cup of hot coffee. "Found something?" "Someone left me gifts," Marcus said, still staring at the note. "But I don't know who." "Well," Mr. Murphy said kindly, "maybe that's the point. Maybe someone just wanted to help without needing credit for it." He handed Marcus the coffee. "On the house. You earned it, did a good job on that sidewalk." Marcus worked mechanically for the rest of the morning, his mind spinning. The note's words played on repeat, "Someone believes in you." No one had said anything like that to him in months. Not since his grandmother's funeral, when her pastor had told him, "Your grandmother believed you'd do great things." He'd felt like a liar at the time, knowing he was about to become homeless, that he'd failed to save enough money or find relatives or somehow prevent this disaster. But now, wearing gloves that someone had bought specifically for him, he felt a tiny seed of something he thought was dead. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but undeniably there. Scene 7, Observer's investigation. Elena's assistant, Maria, had worked efficiently. Within 2 days, she'd learned everything about Marcus Williams that public records and discreet community outreach could reveal. Parents deceased in auto accident when he was 6. Raised by maternal grandmother, who'd worked as a hospital cafeteria aide until declining health forced retirement. Marcus had been an honor student, National Honor Society, AP classes, full scholarship offers from 2 state universities. Then his grandmother passed away from complications of diabetes. No other living relatives. Eviction 30 days later. 8 months homeless. He still goes to the library 3 times a week, Maria reported during their meeting. The librarians say he reads constantly, science, history, philosophy. He helps other homeless people, shares food when he has any. He works odd jobs but won't panhandle. Everyone who knows him says the same thing, polite, hardworking, never causes trouble. Elena absorbed this information with a mixture of admiration and anger. This boy should have been in college. Instead, he was sleeping on park benches because society's safety net had holes large enough to swallow entire lives. And the man who humiliated him? Elena asked. Richard Blackwell III. You already know his reputation. Since that incident, there's been some social media backlash, someone filmed it and posted online. But Blackwell doesn't seem to care. He posted on his own account that people need to stop encouraging professional beggars and take personal responsibility. Elena felt her jaw tighten. She'd built her fortune on capitalism, yes, but capitalism tempered with conscience. People like Blackwell gave wealth a bad name, convinced that fortune was purely personal achievement rather than a combination of opportunity, timing, effort, and, crucially, luck. Start with basic needs, Elena said. Discreetly. He doesn't know who I am yet, and I want to understand him better before revealing myself. Arrange for appropriate gifts, warm clothes, good shoes, food vouchers. Include notes that encourage but don't patronize. And Maria? Find out what it would take to get him off the streets. Emergency housing, job training programs, whatever exists. I want options ready. You're going to change his life, Maria said, smiling. I'm going to give him a chance to change his own life, Elena corrected. There's a difference. I saw how he carried himself that morning, even when being humiliated, he didn't lash out, didn't rage. That's not weakness. That's incredible strength. People like that, given opportunity, can do extraordinary things. She turned to look out her office window at the city below. Somewhere down there, Marcus Williams was surviving another day, unaware that someone had seen him, truly seen him, and decided to act. Scene 8, antagonist escalates. Richard Blackwell was having a frustrating week. The video of his confrontation with the homeless boy had gone viral, over 2 million views. Most comments supported him, agreeing that handouts enabled laziness. But a significant minority called him cruel, heartless, out of touch. One particularly popular comment read, "Imagine having so much and showing so little humanity. That boy asked for shoes in the snow. Not money. Just shoes. And this millionaire couldn't manage basic human decency." Richard had initially ignored it. Social media outrage died quickly, moving to the next controversy within days. But this hadn't died. Someone had identified him, linked to his company, started calling for boycotts. His PR team assured him it would blow over, but it rankled. Then he saw the boy again. Richard was leaving his lawyer's office when he spotted Marcus across the street, carrying groceries for an elderly woman. The boy wore new gloves, a good winter hat. He looked better. Less desperate. Richard felt an irrational surge of anger. He'd said the boy needed to work, to help himself, and apparently that's what he was doing. So why did it irritate him? Perhaps because it suggested Richard had been wrong, that the boy had been trying all along, that poverty wasn't purely a matter of personal failure. Or perhaps because Richard's father would have said exactly what Richard had said that morning, and Richard had spent his entire life proving his father right about everything. He watched Marcus help the woman to her car, refuse payment, smile gently. Something about that smile, genuine warmth despite everything, infuriated Richard in a way he couldn't articulate. People like that, Richard thought, don't understand the real world. They think being nice matters more than being successful. They'll never amount to anything. But even as he thought it, doubt whispered underneath. Richard had never helped anyone without expecting something in return. Had never smiled at a stranger without calculating potential benefit. Success was his religion, and it had left him wealthy but somehow empty. He shook off the thought and returned to his car. The boy didn't matter. The online criticism didn't matter. Only results mattered, only wealth, only winning. Scene 9, second and third gifts. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus received 2 more anonymous gifts. The first arrived at the community center, left with the volunteer coordinator with instructions to give it to the young man who comes for breakfast. Inside was a voucher for 3 months of groceries at a local supermarket, along with another note: hunger should never be a barrier to dignity. Use this. And remember, accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Marcus had stood in the community center bathroom and cried for the first time since his grandmother's funeral. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that someone cared. Someone out there, for reasons he couldn't fathom, wanted him to survive. The second gift came a week later, a smartphone, modest but functional, with a year of prepaid service. The accompanying note read, "Connection is survival. Use this to find opportunities, stay safe, and remember you're not alone. You have potential that's been buried by circumstance, not lost. It's time to start digging it out." With the phone, everything changed. Marcus could now search for jobs online, receive calls from potential employers, stay informed about warming shelters on dangerous nights. He created an email address, started researching community college programs, investigated housing assistance. The gifts weren't just material help. They were statements of belief, evidence that someone saw worth in him when the world kept telling him he was worthless. He began working harder, saving every dollar he earned. With the grocery voucher, he no longer spent money on food, so his savings grew. $20 became $50, then $80. He opened a free checking account at a local credit union. Started imagining, cautiously, afraid to hope too much, that he might actually escape the streets. At night, on his park bench, he'd read the notes on his phone's screen, their words becoming mantras: "You have more strength than you know. Someone believes in you. You have potential." Jack, the veteran who'd given him boots, noticed the change. "You got a guardian angel, kid?" "I think maybe I do," Marcus said softly. "I just wish I knew who, so I could thank them." "Maybe gratitude isn't about thanking them," Jack said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about becoming someone who deserves their faith in you." Marcus looked at his phone, at the notes he'd saved and read every night. "Then that's what I'll do," he promised. "I'll prove they weren't wrong about me." Scene 10, protagonist's small victory. The opportunity came in early December. The community center posted a flyer: part-time youth assistant position available. Help coordinate programs, mentor younger participants, maintain facilities. $15 per hour, 20 hours per week. Marcus had walked past that flyer 5 times before daring to inquire. His homelessness made him feel unqualified for everything. But the coordinator, Mrs. Chen, had seen him volunteering for months. "You should apply," she said when he finally asked. "I don't have an address," Marcus admitted. "Or a resume, or references, or, you have this community center address, we allow that for our homeless participants. You have references, me, Mr. Murphy from the corner store, 3 other business owners you've helped. And your resume is what I've watched you do for months: show up on time, work without complaint, help others, maintain dignity under impossible circumstances. That's worth more than most resumes I see." Marcus applied. The next week, he interviewed with Mrs. Chen and 2 board members. He wore the best clothes he had, still clearly worn, but clean, and answered questions honestly about his situation. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He simply explained what he could offer: reliability, hard work, empathy for the people they served. 3 days later, Mrs. Chen called his new phone. "Marcus?" You got the job. You start Monday. He had to sit down. A real job. Steady income. $400 every 2 weeks after taxes. In 3 months, he'd have enough saved for first month's rent plus security deposit on a room somewhere. He could get off the streets. That evening, he wanted to tell someone, to celebrate, but he had no family. So he sat on his bench and typed a message into his phone's notes app, "To whoever's been helping me, I got a job. A real job. I start Monday. I know you don't want thanks, but I'm thanking you anyway. You gave me hope when I had none. I won't waste it. I promise." He knew his benefactor wouldn't see it, but writing it felt necessary. Like speaking a prayer into the universe. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena had been instrumental in creating that very position. She'd donated $50,000 to the community center with one quiet stipulation: hire someone who genuinely needed a chance. Someone like the boy she'd watched that morning on Riverside Avenue. Scene 11, the sabotage. Richard Blackwell's bad week became a terrible month. The video continued circulating. His company's social media accounts faced constant criticism. He'd started losing clients, not many, but enough to notice. People who'd considered investing backed away quietly. His reputation was damaged. Then someone identified Marcus by name and location. A local news channel did a feel-good segment, "Homeless Teen Gets Job Despite Viral Humiliation." They interviewed him briefly, and Marcus, with his characteristic grace, said only, "I don't blame anyone. I just want to work hard and rebuild my life." That simple statement, delivered without anger or vindictiveness, made Richard look even worse by contrast. The news anchor commented, "Sometimes the poor teach the wealthy lessons about dignity." Richard watched the segment in his penthouse, drinking expensive whiskey, rage building like pressure in a sealed container. This homeless kid, this nobody, had somehow turned Richard into a villain. It was absurd. It was unfair. Richard had worked hard for his success. He deserved respect, not condemnation. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "Never let anyone make you look weak. Winners write history. Losers make excuses." Richard decided to act. He had resources, connections, and no moral compunction about using them. He discovered that Marcus worked at Riverside Community Center. He learned the center's funding came primarily from grants and donations. He found out that one of his father's old business partners sat on the board. One phone call. That's all it took. "Johnson? Richard Blackwell. I need a favor." 2 weeks after Marcus started his job, Mrs. Chen called him into her office. Her face was grave. "Marcus, something's happened. $500 is missing from the donations box in the lobby. It disappeared yesterday while you were covering the front desk alone." Marcus felt the floor drop beneath him. "I didn't take any money." "I would never, I want to believe that," Mrs. Chen said, and she sounded genuinely pained. "But the board is demanding an investigation. They're saying we need to fire you pending resolution." "I'm so sorry." "Please," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "This job, it's everything. I've been saving. In 2 more months I can afford rent. I didn't steal anything. Please, you have to believe me." "I do believe you," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "But I'm overruled. The board voted this morning. I'm required to let you go." Marcus left the community center in a daze. Everything he'd built, every fragile piece of hope he'd assembled, collapsed in an instant. Without the job, he couldn't save for housing. Without housing, he'd be stuck on the streets indefinitely. And now he had fired for suspected theft on his record, which would make finding another job nearly impossible. He walked for hours through cold streets, his mind numb with shock and despair. By evening, he found himself back at Riverside Park, sitting on his bench, staring at nothing. Jack found him there. "What happened, kid?" Marcus explained. Jack listened, then shook his head. "That setup written all over it. Someone wanted you gone. But who? Why? I haven't hurt anyone. Doesn't matter. Some people can't stand watching others rise when they think you should stay down. Jack lit a cigarette. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? Who's going to believe a homeless kid over a community center board? Jack didn't answer. There wasn't a good answer. They both knew how the world worked. Scene 12, Observer steps in. Elena learned about Marcus's firing within 3 hours. She'd maintained discreet monitoring through her assistant, wanting to ensure her anonymous gifts were truly helping. When Maria called with the news, Elena felt cold rage settle over her. Find out exactly what happened, Elena said. Every detail. Timeline, witnesses, who made the decision. And do it quickly. Maria worked through the night. By morning, she had the full story, including one crucial detail: Richard Blackwell's phone call to board member Thomas Johnson 2 days before the money disappeared. Elena reviewed the evidence in her office, connecting dots that would be invisible to most people. The timing was too convenient. Blackwell had means, motive, and connections. The missing money was almost certainly either stolen by someone he'd paid or simply fictional. Johnson could have removed it himself, then claimed theft. We need proof, Maria said. Suspicion isn't enough. Then we'll get proof. What does the community center have for security? Basic cameras, but they're old. Coverage is spotty. Not good enough. But we don't need video of the theft. We need video of when the money was actually last seen, and proof of who had access. Elena made several calls. 2 hours later, a forensic accountant was reviewing the community center's financial records. By afternoon, they had interesting findings. The donation box had been emptied and logged at noon, standard procedure. Marcus had started his shift at 1. The money was reported missing at 5. But the security log showed Thomas Johnson had entered the building at 3:30, though he'd told Mrs. Chen he hadn't been there that day. More digging revealed Johnson's financial ties to Blackwell's company, specifically, a recent investment deal that would profit Johnson significantly if it succeeded. It's circumstantial, Maria warned. Enough to create doubt but not prove innocence definitively. We're not going to court, Elena said. We're going to Mrs. Chen. She'll know what to do with this information. Elena arranged a meeting, arriving at the community center that evening after hours. Mrs. Chen looked exhausted and heartbroken. Mrs. Chen, my name is Elena Rodriguez. I believe you know my company's foundation made a recent donation to your center. Ms. Rodriguez, yes, of course. I'm grateful for your support, but if this is about the theft, it is, but not in the way you think. I believe Marcus Williams was framed. And I have evidence that suggests why and by whom. Elena laid out everything: the timeline discrepancies, Johnson's undisclosed visit, his financial ties to Blackwell, the original viral video. Mrs. Chen listened with growing horror. Oh my God, she whispered. I fired him. You believed what you were told by people you thought you could trust, Elena said gently. Now you know better. The question is, what will you do about it? Mrs. Chen straightened, resolve replacing devastation. I'll call an emergency board meeting. Tonight, if possible. This needs to be addressed immediately. One more thing, Elena said. I'd like to be there. I have some thoughts about the future of your community center, and about Marcus Williams. Scene 13, Vindication. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 that evening. Marcus wasn't invited, wasn't even informed it was happening. He sat on his park bench, having spent the day in numb shock, unable to eat, barely able to think. In the community center conference room, 6 board members assembled. Thomas Johnson arrived last, looking irritated at being called in so late. Mrs. Chen stood at the head of the table. We have new information about the theft allegation. Ms. Elena Rodriguez has evidence that suggests we made a serious error. Johnson's face went carefully blank. Who is Ms. Rodriguez, and why is she involved in internal center business? I'm a donor, Elena said calmly, And a concerned citizen who watched an innocent boy be humiliated on the street, then received anonymous gifts, then found hope through meaningful work, only to have it stripped away by false accusations. I'm involved because I choose to be, and because I have resources to uncover truth. She presented the evidence methodically, the timeline, the security logs, Johnson's undisclosed presence, his financial connections to Blackwell. This proves nothing, Johnson said, but his voice had lost confidence. It proves enough, another board member said, a woman named Patricia Morgan. Thomas, did you coordinate with Richard Blackwell to frame that boy? That's absurd, answer the question, Patricia demanded. Because if this is true, you've destroyed a teenager's last chance at stability to settle some rich man's petty grudge. If that's who we are, I don't want to be part of this organization. The silence that followed was damning. Johnson looked around the table, found no support, and finally slumped. Richard was losing business because of that video. He wanted the kid to suffer consequences. He said the boy needed to learn that actions have repercussions. What actions? Mrs. Chen asked, her voice shaking with anger. Asking for help? Trying to survive? I didn't steal the money, Johnson admitted quietly. I just removed it temporarily and claimed it was stolen. I was going to find it in a week, make it look like a miscount. Richard paid me $20,000. The room erupted. 3 board members stood, shouting condemnation. Patricia Morgan's voice cut through, you're off this board. Effective immediately. And you'll return that $20,000 to this center as restitution. The boy, Elena said quietly, silencing the chaos. You need to bring Marcus back. With an apology. With transparency about what happened. He deserves that. We will, Mrs. Chen said, tears on her cheeks. First thing tomorrow. I'll find him tonight if I can and explain everything. Elena nodded. When you do, tell him someone wants to meet him. Someone who's been watching, who believes in him, and who has opportunities to discuss. She left her card and departed into the cold night, satisfied that justice, small though it was, had been served. Marcus received the call at 6 the next morning. Mrs. Chen, her voice thick with emotion, asked him to come to the center immediately. He went reluctantly, expecting more accusations. Instead, he found Mrs. Chen, Patricia Morgan, and 2 other board members waiting. They told him everything, the setup, Johnson's confession, Blackwell's payment, the evidence that cleared his name. Marcus, Mrs. Chen said, we failed you catastrophically. We didn't investigate properly. We believed money over character. We're so deeply sorry. Marcus stood motionless, processing. So. I'm not fired? Not only are you not fired, Patricia said, we're promoting you. Assistant Program Director, 30 hours a week, $18 an hour. With benefits. And we've established a $2,000 emergency fund in your name to help you secure housing immediately. Marcus felt his knees weaken. He sat down hard, his face in his hands. The relief, the vindication, the sudden resurrection of his future, it overwhelmed him completely. There's more, Mrs. Chen said gently. Someone has been helping you anonymously. Someone who witnessed what happened with Mr. Blackwell and decided to intervene. She'd like to meet you, if you're willing. Marcus looked up, wiping his eyes. She? Her name is Elena Rodriguez. Scene 14, big reveal setup. Marcus researched Elena Rodriguez on his phone that afternoon. What he found left him stunned. Billionaire. CEO. Philanthropist. One of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. And she'd been helping him? The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at her corporate headquarters downtown, a glass tower Marcus had walked past dozens of times but never imagined entering. Mrs. Chen offered to accompany him, but Marcus felt he should go alone. The days until Tuesday passed in surreal anticipation. With the emergency fund, Marcus rented a small room in a boarding house. It wasn't much, shared bathroom, barely space for a bed, but it had a lock on the door and heat that worked. His first night sleeping indoors in 8 months, he lay awake crying. For the meeting, he bought his first new clothes in over a year: slacks, a button-down shirt, decent shoes. The cashier at the thrift store had given him a discount when he explained why he needed them. "Job interview with Elena Rodriguez," she'd said, eyes wide. "Honey, you better rock this." Tuesday morning arrived with unusual warmth. Marcus stood outside Rodriguez Holdings, staring up at gleaming glass. Security cameras watched the entrance. Well-dressed people flowed in and out, all looking purposeful and successful. He almost turned around 3 times. "Someone believes in you," he remembered. "You have potential." He walked inside. The lobby was stunning: marble floors, modern art, soaring ceiling. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Name, please?" "Marcus Williams." "I have an appointment with Ms. Rodriguez." She checked her computer. "Yes, you're expected. 23rd floor, suite 2300. Elevators are just there." In the elevator, Marcus watched the numbers climb. His reflection in the polished doors showed a young man who looked almost normal, clean, clothed appropriately, housed. But inside, he was still the terrified kid sleeping on park benches. The elevator doors opened. A woman waited there, mid-30s, professional, kind smile. "Marcus? I'm Maria, Ms. Rodriguez's assistant. She's looking forward to meeting you. Follow me, please." They walked through a corridor lined with photos, Elena with world leaders, at ribbon cuttings, accepting awards. The message was clear: this woman operated at levels Marcus couldn't even conceptualize. Maria opened a door to a spacious office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. And standing by those windows, turning as they entered, was Elena Rodriguez. Scene 15, the event. Elena was smaller than Marcus expected, barely 5'3", but her presence filled the room. She wore a simple gray suit, minimal jewelry, and an expression of genuine warmth. "Marcus," she said, crossing the office with an extended hand. "Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm but brief. She gestured to a seating area: comfortable chairs, coffee table, no desk to create barriers. "I imagine you're confused," Elena said, sitting across from him. "And probably nervous. Let me start by saying, you're not in any trouble, you haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not here to judge you or ask for anything. I'm here because I saw what happened to you that morning on Riverside Avenue." Marcus's breath caught. "You were there?" "In the cafe across the street. I watched that man humiliate you for doing nothing except asking for basic help. I watched you walk away with dignity intact despite everything. And I decided that anyone who could maintain grace under that kind of cruelty deserved more than what life had dealt them." "The gifts," Marcus whispered. "The gloves, the phone, the notes, that was you?" "Yes. I hope I didn't overstep. I wanted to help but also let you maintain autonomy. You needed support, not charity. There's a difference." Marcus struggled to process. "Why? You don't know me. I'm just what? Just homeless? Just a teenager? Just someone down on their luck?" Elena leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who lost everything: parents, grandmother, home, stability, yet still helps others carry groceries. Still reads philosophy at the library. Still shows up to work on time. Still says please and thank you to people who treat you as invisible. That's not just anything. That's extraordinary character." "I don't feel extraordinary," Marcus admitted. "I feel like I'm barely surviving. Surviving impossible circumstances is extraordinary. Most people would have broken under what you've endured. You bent, but you didn't shatter. Do you know how rare that is?" Scene 16, identity reveal. Elena stood and walked to the window. Marcus watched her silhouette against the city skyline, waiting. "I need to tell you a story," Elena said quietly. "When I was 7, my parents brought me to America with nothing. We were refugees from political violence. My father had been a doctor in our country, but here, his credentials meant nothing. He washed dishes. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in one room with 5 other families. I slept on the floor. She turned to face Marcus. When I was 14, my younger brother got sick. Simple infection would have been nothing with antibiotics. But we had no insurance, couldn't afford a doctor. By the time a free clinic saw him, it was too late. He died 3 days later. Marcus saw moisture in Elena's eyes but also steel in her expression. I watched my parents work themselves to exhaustion so I could stay in school. Watched my mother's hands crack and bleed from cleaning chemicals. Watched my father's pride erode every time someone treated him as stupid because his English wasn't perfect. They died within 2 years of each other when I was 30. Neither lived to see me become successful. She paused, then continued. The morning I saw you on Riverside Avenue, I saw my brother. Same age, same quiet dignity, same desperate hope. And I saw what could have been my family, one tragedy away from homelessness. When that man berated you, told you that you'd made bad decisions, that you deserved poverty. I saw every person who'd ever looked down on my parents. Who'd assumed poverty was moral failure rather than circumstance. Marcus felt tears on his own cheeks now. So I helped you, Elena said, not because you're a charity case, but because I know talent isn't equally distributed, opportunity is. You have intelligence, work ethic, integrity. You just needed a chance. I had resources to provide that chance. It's not generosity, Marcus. It's justice. She returned to her seat. Now, the reason I wanted you here. I've established a new scholarship program through my foundation, full funding for college, including housing, books, stipend for living expenses. It's for young people who faced extraordinary hardship but demonstrated resilience and character. You're the first recipient. Marcus stopped breathing. What? 4 years, fully funded. Any accredited university that accepts you. Based on your transcripts, yes, I obtained them from your high school, you'll have no trouble getting accepted. You had a 3.9 GPA before you became homeless. I can't. Marcus couldn't form words. You can, and you will. Because you're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing it for every kid who sleeps on park benches. Every teenager who loses parents too young. Every person who got dealt an unfair hand and is trying desperately to play it anyway. You're going to show them it's possible. Marcus buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Elena gave him time, didn't rush him, just waited patiently while he processed the impossibility of what was happening. Finally, he looked up. Why me? There are thousands of homeless kids. Why am I special? You're not special, Elena said gently. That's the point. There are thousands like you, smart, hardworking, unlucky. I can't help all of them personally. But I can help you. And maybe, when you're successful, you'll help the next person. And they'll help someone else. That's how change actually happens. One person at a time, creating ripples. She handed him a folder. University applications. Scholarship paperwork. Contact information for my foundation team, they'll help you through every step. Your only job is to try. That's it. Just keep trying. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. Applications for schools he'd dreamed about. Forms that would secure his future. A letter from Elena that began, "To whom it may concern, I am writing to recommend Marcus Williams, a young man of exceptional character." I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. Then don't, Elena said. Thank me by succeeding. Thank me by staying kind even when you have power. Thank me by remembering this moment if you ever see someone else struggling and deciding to help. That's all the thanks I need. Scene 17, Antagonist's downfall. Richard Blackwell learned about Thomas Johnson's confession and the board meeting through his lawyer, who called with barely concealed alarm. You paid someone to frame a homeless teenager? Richard, what were you thinking? I was thinking, Richard said coldly, that actions should have consequences. The consequences are coming for you. Johnson is cooperating fully. He's named you explicitly. The community center is considering criminal charges. And Elena Rodriguez, do you know who she is?